Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm David Shavern, President and CEO of the News Media Alliance, and this is episode 3 of News Take. For those joining us for the first time, News Take are conversations, sometimes pretty wonky conversations, designed to offer unique perspectives and insights around all of the innovation taking place in the news media industry, and there's a lot of it, and how different organizations are employing new ideas and perspectives. We're going to try to get in the weeds a little bit with people who are changing the news industry, particularly those that are helping making better news products and whose perspectives aren't always heard in all the other debates about the industry. And today, I am super excited to welcome Kim Bowie to the show. Kim is a digital journalist who has focused her career on leading breaking news initiatives and conceiving new storytelling forms for digital, print, and broadcast companies catering to local, national, and global audiences. Currently the Director of Product and Audience Innovation at the Arizona Republic, she also co-writes the column Sincerely Leaders of Color, focused on helping journalism become more supportive of journalists of color. Prior to the Arizona Republic, she was editor-at-large for Now This News, focusing on original social reporting and breaking news, and was deputy managing editor for Reportedly, a digital media startup specializing in social journalism. Kim, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, happy to be here, David. Thank you
All
for
right.
inviting me.
Well, let's just start with background. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the news business and how you ended up at this position at the Arizona Republic.
Sure. Like any good Asian, I was supposed to be a doctor. That didn't work out so well. But I've always loved to write. I often tell people that I think most reporters and journalists come at it from one direction or another. Either they're reporters first and they ask a lot of annoying questions, or they're writers first and they love prose. I was a writer first. So I didn't do so well in organic chemistry, ended up in journalism, walked into the student newspaper at Iowa State University. And
I ended up as a lawyer after organic chemistry, so I'm down.
see,
Yeah.
organic chemistry really ruins people.
Uh,
Yeah, so I started off as a reporter. I had a very meandering career. I probably will continue to have a very meandering career of just following what really interests me. It took me from reporting to social media to web production, over into social media reporting, which was sort of new at the time.
yeah.
And then sidetracked into video. I did a little radio, and then came back to local news, which is my true love, I think.
That's fantastic. And tell us a little bit about your specific role at the Arizona Republic. Like, what gets encompassed in your your areas of responsibility and activity?
It's a little bit of a lot. The audience innovation part is pretty easy. It's the social video photo teams, and then I also manage criminal justice and breaking news. And
Oh, wow.
that is because I feel like our audiences, we first get to know them through breaking news and criminal justice coverage.
Yeah.
It is a really good place to innovate because the stories are, in a sense, semi-rote. Like, you kind of know what's going to happen, and there's sort of a set way of doing things. And so there's a lot of leeway in how you do those things, and how you report those stories. The product side is a personal interest of mine, and that really is the how. I love looking at how we can tell better stories, how we can integrate better with our audience's lives, listen to them, become more useful, and really get away from the pedestal style journalism that has ended up with us not being trusted by the majority of people.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so much rich stuff in there. Let's start with the product parts,
Sure.
because I talk about this a lot. I engage with people a lot in terms of the news products, and really the still huge amounts of innovation that has to happen in news products, right? And you have had this emergent set of discussions about better product thinking when it comes to news and journalism. A product focus, a product development focus. What does that mean from your perspective? In particular, how does a product focus or product development focus differ from what we were doing before or have been doing?
Yeah, I product. The term product, comes from the more like a tech sphere, and in terms of like what are the products that face our audience, and being able to project manage and translate those ideas and make sure that things move forward. The way I think product manifests in journalism is slightly different, but in many ways the same. I'm a founding member of the News Product Alliance, and we like to call people product thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need a certificate in product management to be a good product person. You just have to be someone that thinks in terms of product. And thinking in terms of product is really just putting the user's need first and trying to figure out how the platforms that we already have and that we could expand into can best serve those users. It is really it does encompass as much of the journalism as it does the tech side and the business side, but people tend to think of it as like a business side, a tech side thing, because a lot of the solutions end up being tech or business solutions, because there are a lot of the places we're very behind in. I think we're very good at telling stories. I don't think that's going to change. Hopefully. And we have done a lot of really good thinking on that as an industry, but we kind of forgot along the way who we're telling stories for. And that is what a true product thinker thinks about. A lot of product people these days that are in newsrooms come from an audience background. And that's because we, as audience folks, are so honed in on, wait, we think as journalists that this is what they want. However, it is not, because journalists are not regular news consumers. And this is what the audience that we are actually approaching looks at, and how we can find new audiences and the kind of experimental design that's involved in that. It's honestly a lot of fun if you're kind of the kind of person who likes to lab tinker with things. I think that's what product is. It's really just tinkering with the recipe and ingredients that we have on hand.
Yeah, I'm going to editorialize for a second. I've, the industry historically, if you went way back, was actually very innovative on the product side. We kind of lost that along the way for a variety of reasons, and now we're in this moment of really just being recipients of other people's technical decisions, right? And I have a long-term plan to really get us going, get the water flowing in the opposite direction a little bit. Us having our own views and perspectives about what's the right technological solutions between us and our consumers. But I was editorializing. One of the things, part of how I think about this is the industry is in this moment where, on the plus side, a lot of publishers, particularly local publishers, have had much better experience with digital subscriptions than they expected. Okay? And you saw over 2020 and 2021 driving a lot of digital subscriptions, and people are like, whoa, that's cool, man. Like I didn't know that could happen, or they were skeptical that it could happen. So the good experience. But if you look at penetration into addressable market, even the people killing it are at very low single digits penetration into whatever they think their addressable market is, right? I mean, you have metros with a couple million people in the metro area, and they may be really happy have gotten 100,000 digital subscribers or something. So there's a huge delta that on the one hand is an opportunity. Whoa, we can really grow. But on the other hand, forces you to think, what are really the changes? A lot of it has to be product, right? What are the changes in how we deliver and connect with consumers that are really going to help us move that penetration up? I don't know. Is that part of how you think about this?
Yeah, it is, because if you think about digital, let's talk about digital subscriptions in particular. Yeah. Digital subscriptions is a departure from paper subscriptions, which we newspapers have relied on for a really long time. And I talk to, and I get emails from both our print and digital subscribers who don't really understand what their subscription gets them.
Yeah.
And that is a result of us not being very good at delineating our product, at showing what the product is. I think someone on our team, I just told them that USA Today Network has a crossword app, and they're like, "We have that?" Yes, we have that.
Yeah.
Because we've been following for so long. At the point, and I don't know exactly when this happened, the point at which the chasm really started to show itself, let's guess like 2008 or so, where we realized we had really screwed up with our audiences and they just didn't care about us any longer and had gone to social media, Netflix, wherever, all these other places for information. Since then, we've been playing catch up. And even on the product side, we look at, and you see all of these articles about, people only want one subscription, and why would they pay for the Arizona Republic instead of paying for Netflix, and Netflix just up their prices, and you don't get as much with your paper subscription. That a lot of that is somewhere like landing between product and marketing, of making sure the things that we have decided to do with the stories that we tell are clear, concise, and appeal to the right people, but also that we tell them about that.
Yeah.
Things we're not entirely good at. And those audiences that we stand to gain from digital subscriptions are usually new, younger audiences. And by young, I mean like under 45. So
yeah, the demographics.
A little skewed.
Yeah.
But
a little skewed in our business.
A little skewed. And we look at penetration numbers I think I look at penetration numbers about every month. And I have targeted certain zip codes where we had zero penetration. Like nobody in this zip code subscribed to the Arizona Republic, print or digital. And if you start looking at the demographics of those using research tools available, which are pretty easy, you realize that a lot of those are young, communities of color, probably college educated, but really just, if you ask them where they get their information from, not even news, but information from, they'll say friends and family.
Yeah.
And they are probably the arbiter of information for their circle of friends and family. So they're the ones that people go to are like, "Hey, I don't know where to get a KN95 mask. You probably know, David. Like you're in with the cool kids. You know what's going on."
Yeah.
And we haven't reached those people. And that is really the challenge ahead.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I also, man, we could talk about sort of how we evolved in this space a lot. I think there was also a whole period where it was a real lack of self-confidence in the industry. Just let's take a bunch of bad advice from people outside the industry and impose it on ourselves. And I get that, people are like, "Oh, this internet thing, wow," and I get that there are moments where you feel like you're not well situated, but I also I think most people are well over this. This is a primarily digital industry. We have these other products that we sell, but at this point, I think we deserve some self-confidence to be able to say, "Oh, what works for us," right? And not just somebody swooping in saying, "This is what you should do." And getting back to those moments when we can really do that and develop it. And it's also always been interesting to me that local publishers have always been a core source of information that flowed to people through other places. Notably TV. There's a whole thing where you get a lot of commentators said, "Well, the audiences moved to TV news in the 50s." Well, yeah, they did, but it was still our stuff. We were actually still creating most of the content that got distributed through this other way, and we're for what's happening in Phoenix, or you're still the stuff a lot of times, right? So anyway, I'm digressing too much, but getting back to In terms of audience engagement, particularly with
Mhm.
younger audiences and products, what have you been excited about in terms of like highly engaging products, newsletters, text? I mean, what kind of experiments you're running? What are you excited about?
Well, I love experiments, so there's a dozen and a half I could tell you about. But I think what is really interesting to me of late is really starting to define what community-centered journalism means.
Hmm.
We spend a lot of time figuring out like what does audience engagement even mean? And for a while, that was just like tweet your stories. And then we
Yeah.
moved on to sort of like, oh, well, ask the people on the Twitter for some interesting things that we'll put in the story. And we've evolved since then. And now we're looking at these other platforms and other ways of figuring out what community-centered journalism means and shedding a little bit of the ego, but not losing our confidence in terms of they have to come to us for they have to come to our platforms for the news. Like we got to go where they are.
Yeah.
And I think that is what text newsletters, um, listening sessions, all of those, that's what that's about.
Mm.
Going to where people are and making sure that we facilitate conversations there. Like I don't think we are here to fix anything, but we are here to give people the information to fix that will help empower them to fix their lives and to live better, richer lives. So one thing that I find really fascinating is we run this text line, which has gone from everything to be like once a week a text or to every day a text for coronavirus information.
Mm.
And it's crazy basic coronavirus information. It is just the stuff that I copy paste from our article where we distill and do like some light analysis on the state coronavirus numbers,
Yeah.
copy paste those into a text and text those out to people. What I notice happen is those people forward that text to their family members. There are several people who run Facebook, neighborhood Facebook groups and or post it on Nextdoor because it is just quicker. It's there. They don't have to go to the Arizona Republic, look for the story that we put it in, copy paste it over themselves. They can just do it quickly. And it's in, maybe less than 500 characters. So I think that's interesting. Newsletters I wouldn't call new, but the
Yeah.
fact that we are being personal with them probably
Oh,
is more new.
tell me about that. And personalization of
Yeah,
newsletters. Tell me about that.
the Substackification of
Yeah.
news. I think it is. Sometimes the news industry suffers a little bit of like shiny thing syndrome, is what I like to call it.
Oh, a lot.
Where yes,
Yeah.
we found newsletters and we're like, oh man, this really works. It really converts. And then the people who did best at newsletters were the ones who let a reporter or an a editor really show their voice. Because if you think about email in general, what you use email for is like, I can email my grandma emails me back, and it's a conversation.
Yeah.
What we were doing before was like, here's 17 links in a row. That's not a conversation.
Right.
And I think that is why the idea, the concept of a Substack or a writer-driven newsletter won, because it feels like they're writing to you. That's why texting is so popular. It feels like I am texting individually these 3,000 people that have signed up for this. They feel like they know me.
Yeah.
I told them I got sick. They were like, I hope you feel better.
Oh,
Uh, it's really cute. They're
no.
remembering that we were people at the end of the day, that we're not this uh, kind of great giant thing on a pedestal that like deigns to give information out every once in a while, but that we are humans that are trying to live our best lives too, and we just happen to be very good at getting answers.
That's so fascinating. One of the interesting and compelling things about, say, podcasts is if you do it right, which is really hard, by the way. Most people don't do it right. Is a tremendously, as they say, intimate experience, right? You're in your own head, usually with earbuds on, with somebody, and you're right there with their voice. And the people who do it really well, you really do feel there in a sense.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting to think about how you can create other products that give some sense of directness to people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that they can be really attached to. That's super interesting. I'm also, there are whole categories of areas where newspapers had kind of gotten out of the business. Take weather, for example, okay,
Mhm.
where it was just up in the corner. Do I take an umbrella today or don't take an umbrella today? And I've seen people see this moment. One of the things about moments of disruption is that everything gets scrambled. And yeah, you
Yeah.
get a lot of things aren't great, but also opportunities. And like at the Washington Post has the Capital Weather Gang, where these people
Yep.
who send you emails every day, by the way, and it's written out, and they go on Twitter and they engage with the public. And it turns out there are a lot of people who want to talk about the weather. And again, to your point, it's reaching them where they are, not being constrained by traditional topic areas and really engaging with the public that really works. Let me, before I get off that, what have you been looking at other formats, audio, video and the rest? I also have this working thesis about the people who were in those spaces, local broadcast TV, local radio, they're being disrupted too. And now you
Mhm.
don't need a license to get into that business. Should that be an opportunity for us? How are you
Yeah.
thinking about that? How are you approaching that?
Oh, yeah. I think having spent a small amount of time at an NPR member station, I really think I I was disappointed that public radio and TV did not um, see the opportunity they had in front of them, because it does feel like Steve Inskeep is talking to me every
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
He feels like my friend. Like Nina Totenberg is telling that story for me, and that is just the feeling you have always gotten from
Yeah.
NPR, and they couldn't. It took them a very long time, and I think they're getting there now, figuring out how to translate that to the internet,
Yeah.
um, because the internet somehow was this big hump that was scary, even though it's pretty simple. It's just a different set of tubes. It's the same stuff,
Yeah.
different set of tubes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
By the
you can
way,
say the
can
same
I
thing.
can I tell you a bizarre experience? I was
Yeah.
actually interviewed by Steve Inskeep one time after listening to him for like 20 years and sitting across and hearing that voice come out. It's startling. I was like, I've heard you my whole life. Anyway, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
It is no. I really enjoyed it. Like I have been like being on the radio is kind of scary because it feels like, oh my god, I'm gonna be in someone's ear.
Yeah.
And that's the same way I would say with TV, right? Like sure, no one my age, no one approaching 40 is probably looking at or watching the 10 p.m. News broadcast anymore. However, they're probably watching the live stream when there's a car chase in LA.
Yeah.
And some TV stations have figured out how to capitalize on some things, but not everything. So I think audio video is a place where we're still figuring it out. And the we in this sense is not even just journalism, but just media in general. I mean, if you look at some of like the audio chat room apps that have come up in the past year
Mhm.
and then not necessarily failed but kind of faded, we're just trying to figure out how do we do that, especially in the pandemic. And I think that's really what threw everything for a loop of and where you can actually see a lot of success and ingenuity where we were thrown like the set of circumstances you knew not no does not exist anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So try something different, and we have. And I think there are some things that have succeeded, but I also think a lot of people have taken a step back from what they consider news, like quote unquote news or information,
Yeah.
because they are overwhelmed, sad, and they feel like we are not treating the larger story in a humane way.
Mm. Oh, interesting. Could you talk a little more about that in terms of, is that a partially a pandemic thing? Is it partially the political world we live in?
Yeah.
And then how do you I mean, there's a lot interesting in what you said, but how then do you adapt in terms of we're reporting on stuff, but then we have to react to where our audience is in the moment with that difficult space? I don't know. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Yeah.
No, no, it does. I think it is the pandemic. We're all stuck at home for however many
Yeah.
months, and felt really disconnected, and we're seeking connection in some way. But then on top of that, we had just had a what feels like never-ending cycle of political polarization, which I hate using that term, but that's what it is. And you know, uh, it information has become weaponized in the past few years, and there's too much of it. So there's too much information. There's too many places you get information from.
Yeah.
Everything from my Alexa to my computer to my phone. All things coming at me every day.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, the I don't know how to assess that information anymore, and it's being used against me.
No.
Uh,
Talk about that.
I I mean, I can if you have an anti-vaxxer in your life,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what it is. Like if which everybody pretty much does has
Yeah.
you probably come across one of them, and that is a good example of weaponized information, which is not a new thing. If you look at like the history of the Cold War and journalism back then, all of this is information being weaponized, for good, bad reasons, intentionally, unintentionally. It doesn't really matter. And how you get above that and through to people when they're naturally skeptical already, and now extra skeptical of anything they're told, is, I think it's hard.
Yeah.
And connection is it. That's really the answer I have. It's the more you can connect to people and make it feel like you do care, and you are here to help them, and that, I think that is really the way to get through to somebody.
Yeah. And then from a local publisher perspective, how do you switch from being a contributor to their problem to being the the person they trust or the entity they trust to help you walk through it, right? Help you
Yeah.
uh, tease out the information that's important, and also kind of arm you for the crazy anti-vax debate over dinner or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that's really powerful. It does. It also does relate to something in particular about how do you think about younger audiences. I'll use the term Gen Z, although I don't, I don't know how relevant those categories are anymore. But um, we've done some research that's kind of interesting that uh, people come with these assumptions that are now a little old, right? Information wants to be free. People won't pay for information. What we found is that really was evocative of people who grew up in a period of internet information, but then younger generation, Gen Z in particular, have gotten more used to the idea that you pay for Netflix, you pay for other stuff, right?
Mhm.
And I think a big part of it is you have to put your passwords in everywhere, even if you took them from your parents or something, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. How were you thinking about the uh, young adult audience for your content, and how it might be different than older audiences, and how you meet them where they are and help them
Mhm.
solve some of these bigger information challenges that they have.
Yeah. What's interesting is, so I have two nephews, one who's 18 and who's 16. And I regularly, every time I see them every Christmas, I'm like, so show me your phone. And you're showing how you're doing things. And um, yes, of course, they do things very differently from even me.
Yeah.
And it took me forever to understand what TikTok was and how
Yeah.
to utilize it. Now I love it, but it's taking us, and we tend to want to bucket other generations as like, oh, they care less or they care in a different way, which I don't think is necessarily true. I think it is just a path to becoming it an adult, honestly.
Yeah.
So when I was 18, I don't remember reading the newspaper every day.
Yeah.
um, but I also didn't, Twitter didn't exist. And I don't even remember where I got my news at that point before I even got into journalism. Just like, I don't know, random internet websites, sometimes
Yeah.
RSS feeds, maybe. Um, and I think that's probably the same for an 18-year-old now. It's like they're getting information from whatever pipe is the coolest right now, but they're not really at the point in their lives where they need news to be useful.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, with the exception, I would say, of like people who are like really active in some sort of politics or some sort of cause, which I
Yeah.
think that is a difference between generations lately, that kind of ebbs and flows with how deeply politically motivated they are or not. But then you start getting into your 20s and you start finding information more useful. And I think that is sort of the key of making sure they know who we are when they're 18.
Yeah.
They don't have to love us, they just have to know who we are, that we
Yeah.
exist.
And that
And
you're basically trusted. They may not trust you yet, but that
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, or even their mom trusts you,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
uh or their aunt trusts you. So something as simple as that. And then when they're ready for that, to be able to be useful and thoughtful and all of the things that we need to be, um which is not, I mean, not dissimilar. I don't think my information needs are terribly dissimilar from a boomer's, like my straight information needs.
Yeah.
How I would like to consume them, probably, yeah, it's a little different. My parents, however, my parents have really gotten into YouTube in the past 2 years. I don't even use YouTube.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, I don't think it's a generational young versus old thing as much as it is we have to find a way to continually be useful, and have impact in people's lives. And then at some point, hopefully, when they're ready to pay and not use their parents' Netflix, then they will pay for us.
Yeah. And it's so particularly interesting at the local level. There's this broader internet phenomenon of sort of nationalization of attention, right? That
Mhm.
you know the if you're online, somebody in Anchorage wants to talk to somebody in Atlanta, so they talk about what they have in common, which is it could be national political, it could be celebrity, it could be right. But there's a long-term movement away from local attention, which would have been different than, say, my parents' generation. For my
Mhm.
parents' generation, Nixon would have been way down the news funnel, right? It would have been a
Mhm.
lot of local, and national political would have been way down.
Mhm.
And then there were events. Of course, Trump was just the kerosene on the fire about
Yeah.
nationalization of attention. But interestingly, because of COVID and because of racial justice challenges and debates, we've had this moment where I think to some degree the telescope's been spun around, and that all of a sudden people care what their mayor had to say, when a lot of people had no idea who their mayor was before, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
can we? I don't know. Are you sensing that with audiences? And then I guess one of the challenges is how do we hang on to that as
Yeah.
as it evolves?
Yeah. I think. Oh, I would blame us,
Yeah.
like journalism writ large, for the nationalization.
Yeah.
I, I think we sort of made that for ourselves in, like, letting places, like, not to throw BuzzFeed on the bus, but letting places like BuzzFeed be like, oh, they're the ones leading the conversation about what is new and interesting to young people now. Well, why?
Yeah.
We didn't have to let that be that way. And that was at the point where I think a lot of local news organizations were struggling with, how do we make money, and how do we regain trust, and just sat on that question for probably far too long. Like,
Yeah.
we talked about it, of course, like news people, we talked about it for what feels like 20 years, but we didn't really do anything about it, when the answer is generally something much more simple than we make it out to be, of like, you should just go talk to your neighbors.
Yeah.
um, I did a bunch of research on empathy as a trait in newsrooms, and nobody used the term then, but everybody uses it now in terms of like, you want an empathetic reporter. But the questions I got all the time after that were like, well, how do you employ empathy? I'm like, you just go out and be empathetic to the person next door to you.
Yeah.
And that's how you become
Yeah,
a
you
great
probably don't need a college course on it, right?
no, no,
Yeah.
you just be a caring, real human being and understand that you can do that and be a journalist at the same time. So at some point in time, people thought that they could not be both. When I was doing my research, people
Yeah.
said, oh no, I would never employ empathy. That's taking away from my objectivity. I'm like, but it's not. Like, how is that even possible? But that, I think people are confusing it was sympathy. Same way of how they're looking at we're now looking at local stuff again.
Mhm.
People were always looking for information locally. And I think I remember when I first moved to LA, I could not get any information about anything in LA. So I ended up going to LAist, back when it was a Gothamist publication and independently run, for the utility of the day, which is what's happening this weekend.
Yeah.
What is that weird building down the street?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who is that guy?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And local news is rediscovering like, oh, that's right, we're actually really good at that.
Yeah.
We were always really, I don't know why we were trying to compete with BuzzFeed because it was the cool thing, when really what we're good at is, what is that thing down the street?
And we're good at it, and nobody else is going to do it. Right.
Yeah.
It's not like BuzzFeed's going to come into and do that, right? You have the opportunity sitting there, you have the skill set. It's really thinking, I guess, to a much earlier point, thinking constantly and deeply about your audience. Like, you have to be into some moment where you are thinking, wow, somebody driving down the street is really intrigued by that crazy new building. What is that, right? But you have to be really obsessed about thinking about the audience, and not just some ephemeral sense, like I'm writing something important, so obviously there's an audience for it, but like, where are people in that moment today, right?
Yeah, where are people actually looking? I do think, Axios Local is launching in a bunch of different cities, including the Fairfield city of Phoenix. And then, of course, when that was announced, I had like a minor moment of panic, like, oh God, they're going to come unseat us. I'm like, wait a second. They're writing a newsletter that's probably going to include news from us.
Oh, definitely
to
will.
your
Yeah.
earlier point. Yeah. So we can win. We can still win at this. What are they doing that we are not? And that's really the question. Like, all these places that are winning that are not necessarily hyper local, like locally based, they're probably doing something that we are not. BuzzFeed, to go back to BuzzFeed, what they were doing was making stories digestible in an era when we were making Snowfall like long, beautiful, scrolly telly stories that no one could load on their phones. So I think really it's just a simple question of like, I return to this a lot, and my newsroom's probably sick of hearing me ask it, like, how is this useful? Like, how can I take what you're telling me in this 10,000 word article and use it tomorrow? Like, does it help me? And if it doesn't help me, then why do I need to know?
Yeah, real immediate and providing value to readers. Kim, let's talk a little bit about newsrooms generally, and and journalism, and the evolutions that need to continue to take place, both in terms of perspective, like we were talking, but diversity, inclusion, how we organize ourselves to tell these stories. And I know you co-write a column, I think, Sincerely Leaders of Color, and I just generally, let's just start generally, ask your thoughts on what are some core changes that everybody has to be thinking about Where have we made some progress? Where are the many areas where we got to make a lot more
Yeah.
progress? And how do we start down those roads?
Yeah. Um, we were lucky enough, Emma Krogerovam and I were to be friends that happened to talk about this a lot in a moment where that became the cool thing, the shiny thing
Yeah.
to say like, oh, we're doing something about DEI because
Yeah.
we had had that 2020 summer racial justice reckoning. And I had known it was coming for a while. Like I could hear it boiling, and it's interesting because I don't even think I'm like my newsroom generation is leading it. It's probably the generation that's like slightly after mine that is demanding change.
Yeah.
I politely asked for change,
Yeah.
and then
And when that doesn't go for it, you have to get less polite. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I politely asked for it, and then I went into marketing, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to this fight,
Yeah.
and then you have a younger generation that is like, no, we're demanding it because our generation is used to demanding things, and is much more politically conscious than yours was, which I think is great.
Mhm.
What do newsrooms need to do? um, I think the easy answer for newsrooms is always like, oh, we need to be more diverse. We need to include more diverse voices. We need to have more diverse staffers. And yes, 100%, you got to do that. That's like the basic thing you have to endeavor to do.
Yeah.
But you cannot do that without investigating yourself in what led to you ending up in a place where you were not diverse, where you were not including those voices and not thinking of it as a check mark. This is not a to-do list item,
Oh, absolutely.
diversifying
Yeah.
newsrooms. It's not something, it is a process that is probably going to be ongoing for a very long time.
Man, you said that so well. Yeah, and I'm going to steal exactly how you talked about that because, there's something about my gut reaction when they say we need more diversity in the newsrooms. Absolutely true. But that also strikes me as, to your point, the conclusion, like, or not the conclusion, but like the a a necessary state
Yes.
that's obvious. So the hard stuff is not that. It's okay. How did we get where we are? But also, how do we start to really address that in some core sense? It's a it's something that kind of rolls over the hard stuff. And then I think organizations get to the hard stuff are like, and of course a lot of progress isn't made. So
Yeah.
yeah. So how I don't know. How do you think about starting that? Is it self-examination? Has got to be the first part of that.
I think that's part of it. And then I think you're completely right, David. Like we need to be more diverse. We need um, more diverse voices is the outcome, right? And what we really need right now is how do we get to that outcome?
Yeah.
And the answer, we've been looking at we've been trying the easy answers for decades, and we're still trying them now. We're like, okay, we'll just create a fellowship for young journalists of color, which is fine and dandy, but that does not leave us with more Black, brown, gay, transgender editors, executive editors. It has to be the whole thing has to be representative. And I think that comes with some tough questions for the people who are in leadership right now, and some changes in how they operate, and listening more than talking, and definitely being wrong a lot, and evaluating how they act, and then also trying to figure out like, okay, what are the circumstances that will make us appealing to that group. I think this era of unionization also is kind of been happening in the same vein as asking for racial justice, because it is a more, for many places, effective way of demanding change. and outlining what change needs to be needed. But again, that's all focused on the outcomes. We don't have a lot of people who are focused on like, how do we do this right now? And that's what Sincerely Leaders of Color is really trying to look at. We're trying to ask some hard questions about, we know we need to get there. Let's all agree that we need to get to that place where, newsrooms are safe and safe places for journalists of color to succeed. However, we need step one. We're at step one, not step 22. And step one, the things we talk about are they feel so simple. We now make sure that we have interns from community colleges, and that's great. And we also make sure you have to justify, you have to be able to justify wherever you work for, like, have you looked at candidates of color or candidates from a diverse background for this job? But you also have to keep them, and retention is really the tricky point. Retention is really the thing that we kind of struggle with. I mean, you can say it's the Great Resignation, which it in part is, but I think it's also, this is a really stressful, hard job. And then you add on top of that people dealing with really tough things at home because of the pandemic. Then why would you do this?
Okay, well, one last question. I took some notes before, and I received some notes, and there's this whole thing about you've done some work on something called the middles. And yes. So, yeah, could you just explain that concept a little bit? And because I understand it's like jobs that didn't exist before people had them, but if you could explain that, and does it connect with these other topics?
Oh, it is these other topics.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a little slightly graduated from a middle right now, but the middles are like people who are in some form of leadership, whether that's actually like managerial leadership or content leadership, and have felt like you just ended up there. And I think that is very common to a lot of people who are, sort of at the middle manager level, like, oh, I somehow was a decent reporter and just kept getting promoted because I needed more money. And now I'm an editor and I have no idea how to do this. It's super common. And what I'm learning is it goes all the way up to the top. At the top, they'll probably say, I don't know how to do this either.
Yeah, I hear you.
And it's really it's newsrooms, but also creative fields in general, where the industries have expanded so fast and demanded more diverse, younger, newer leadership so fast that now you have this generation of people who have no training and feel kind of dumb to say, like, I actually do not know how to put together a newsroom budget or a project budget. No one taught me that. It just was done. So now I have to figure it out. And so that's what I write the middles for, like that space where it is hyper confusing, and really half the time what you need to hear is, you're not the only person, that everybody in this position feels this way. But it's also trying to find ways for people to get training, which I'm really grateful that there are lots of sort of emerging leader trainings that are happening throughout the industry from all sorts of groups and places. I think that is really helpful. A lot of middles I know now are graduating to executive leadership, and I think that's going to be a whole nother that's going to be a whole nother thing, because I talk to friends that are executive editors at many places, and they really feel lost and unsupported. And I'm the only Black man in the room, and I happen to be the executive editor, something like that. Or I'm the only woman in leadership, and so I manage a bunch of old white dudes. Like, how do I do this? These are things that we don't do, because journalism generally just promoted people for being good journalists, but you can be a great reporter and a terrible manager. Uh,
Yeah.
and we sort of forgot that.
Well, yeah, there are different arenas. If we had a whole another hour, we could talk about what happens in academia, right? People who are really
Yes.
good academics, really good teachers or researchers, and they get promoted to be assistant dean or something. And then they're supposed to manage a bunch of people who have never managed anybody ever. And but in particular uh, in these environments, as you just described, retention, keeping people in the system, you know, super high effectiveness. Also dealing with change, we you know, people need support. They need training. They need to feel like that there's the organization is there for them, right? And
Yeah.
that's so critical and so important to all these topics. I could talk to you for like hours, Kim. Listen, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. I love the conversation. I just very much appreciate the time and your willingness to talk to folks in the industry about what you do, and we're thrilled to have you. And thank you very much.
Of course, it was a pleasure.
Take care. Take care.
Bye.